so I titled the talk, you know, so I've invented something, now what? Just to think about, so just a quick poll, how many of you, are working on something that may actually have applicability and may actually turn into a product or get used by someone at the end of the day? Okay, it's a good number of you. So, one of the questions is, how do we actually get these ideas out of the lab into the hands of somebody who can use them? Oh, look at that, it went away. So, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things that we look for in the Technology Transfer Office, which is where I'm from. My name is Darren Fast, by the way. And we'll look at some of the things that matter to us when we're looking at how do we commercialize the technology, with the hope of, if you understand some of the factors that matter, you will have an understanding of how to tell when something you may have invented, when you have that aha moment, that, hey, this is something that's really cool, that might have some value, what you might do with it, and how you might actually deal with it. So my background starts in education. It cleared itself up. It went away.
Okay.
For now.
I hope you gave yourself a very nice introduction.
I did.
Okay,
I had just
excellent.
started. So I started with a PhD in biochemistry. I then moved out of the academic stream into a startup company where I was doing early stage product development for some monoclonal antibodies that were targeting cancer. And that turned into a project management and regulatory affairs type job where part of my job was to help shepherd these things through the regulatory process. I then spent a number of years with a venture capital firm where I was tasked with assembling technologies to put into new companies, which was a whole lot of fun, and then we ran out of money. So then I became an independent consultant and did that for about 10 years, where I was working with companies to help them define what their product should be, who might use their product, what sort of things mattered to their customers, did a lot of market research, and that sort of thing. I also tried my hand at being an entrepreneur and started a couple of companies in that process, all around in the technology space. And then more recently, the last about 4 years or so, I've been in technology transfer. And what we do at the Technology Transfer Office here at the University of Manitoba is we take inventions that people make, so students, faculty, whoever has an invention. We've got a policy here that things are jointly owned, so if you invent something, it's jointly owned between you, the inventor or inventors, and the institution. So you're obligated to tell us that you've created something, and then we will do an evaluation on it, and we will then see if it makes sense to move forward with it. The big thing that we're trying to do is really to capture some of the value of what's being researched here at the university. So that's a part of what we do, is that intellectual property protection and licensing. And then the other half of what we do is working with industry that's outside of the university and trying to bring them back into the university so that we can do some collaborative research. Anybody here? I know, sorry, you've got some collaborations with industry. Anybody else working with an industry partner right now? Got some? Okay, so there's a little bit of that. So we'll talk about that at the end. We're really trying to increase the research base here at the university by working on industry problems. And we think that's good for you as students because they're future employers. And we think that's good for our researchers here because it gives them other types of problems to solve. And then maybe some of what I'm doing today is just some education around what does this look like, what are the things that matter. And we do that both for people inside the university and for people outside the university, because there's a pretty big culture shift when you move to the private sector versus being in a university lab. So I have a team of people. I don't get to do this by myself, thankfully. And they're there, so if you see them in the hall sometimes, say hi. They're very friendly. So I want to talk about commercializing research. How do we actually take the ideas that you're working on and where they have commercial potential? How do we get them into the hands of people that actually can use them. This is a mass spec machine. We generate about between $300,000 and $500,000 in royalties annually coming off of this thing. Research that was done here at the University of Manitoba in the early to mid-90s. In about 2001, there was a patent that was issued. That technology was licensed to a company that's now been sold 3 or 4 times to another company. And every time one of those things is sold, they cut us a check, effectively. So it's a real effective way of bringing new technology to the market and making sure that it's used. But how do you actually do that? Why do you want to do that? Some of the reasons are recognition. Everybody loves a good story. Everybody loves their name in the paper, especially when it's around something that they created and is now being used. We want to attract and retain good quality faculty and students. We want this to be an exciting place where we're at the interface between basic research and applied research. We don't want to lose the basic research. We're also partly about economic development. We want to make sure that we've got lots of economic development here that pays taxes, so that pays for a lot of the research. We want to attract corporate research support, and we also, as an aside, we bring in some licensing revenue into the university, and of course, as I said, that's shared with the inventors of the technologies. New product development is really hard. There's a huge failure rate. So for every 100 new ideas that you've got at the beginning, about 10 actually make it onto the market. So there's a lot of failure, and you have to be really comfortable with failure if you're going to be playing in this new product development game. But as researchers, you're already comfortable with that because you're doing experiments, you're trying to understand things, how they work. So you end up chasing down a lot of, dead ends. At least that's how my research went when I did my PhD. So if you don't have that experience, you're really lucky. And new products, this is an important graph to think about when you're thinking about anything you do with a new product. So back over here is all the hard work that you're doing, all this research. And in the commercial world, that effectively counts for nothing. So that when the commercial company starts doing it, they see the research as a sunk cost and they really don't care too much about it. But they have to do more work and they have to spend a lot of resources. So they take a financial hole here while they optimize whatever it is that might have been created. They scale it, they build a bunch of them, and at some point, they start selling a few. That sales ramps up over time. Hopefully, the costs get paid for, and then there's a net profit here. And at some point, the market matures and the sales fall off. That is pretty much a standard view of product life cycle. Nothing is on the market forever. I don't have it in this slide deck, but the average lifespan of a new product these days is somewhere, depending on the sector, of course, somewhere between months and probably about 5 to 10 years. If you think about your phone, which has a lot of new technology in it, anybody here using a phone that's 4 years old or older? 3 years? Yeah, maybe. But most of us have a phone that's probably less than 2 years old. That's just reality, and all that technology in there has been superseded, or lots of it has been superseded by the newer technologies. So there's a couple of ways to think about commercializing technologies, and it's useful as broad concepts. You can think about sort of pushing technology out. So you've got this brilliant idea. You go, I know how to, I have this idea, I understand how this works, I can solve problems with this. So that's the technology push. It's a lot of what happens here at the university. A couple of great examples of these are things like lasers came out of that. People created the first lasers, and then they said, wow, okay, we got this really, intense, focused source of light. What can we do with that? And now lasers are in all kinds of applications. Synthetic diamonds were another. So we can compress things enough to make a diamond. What do we do with it? The other way to think about this is market pull. So out there in the market, people say, if only we could solve that problem. That problem causes pain, discomfort, inconvenience, something. How do we solve that? So that's, we've got a clear need, and then we try to figure out a solution to it. Lots of medical problems come around this way because it's obvious there's people who are hurting. But a couple of other great examples of this, are things like the wireless keyboard. And this is I love this story. This is a great story that demonstrates market pull. So the saw stops. This is a technology that basically the blade of that saw has a sensor in it, or somewhere in there is a sensor that detects the impedance or the resistance. And it can tell the difference as the tooth of the blade touches a piece of wood versus a piece of tissue. In that is also a charge, basically an explosive device that will knock the blade down as soon as it detects a problem. So these guys came out of the States where liability is a huge issue. So you've got kids in high school shops doing woodworking. They cut their finger off. The school gets sued. They thought, well, if we could only invent a saw that wouldn't cut off people's fingers. This thing actually causes a small scratch, but you don't lose your finger if you stick your finger in the blade. And it's brilliant, because what school in their right mind in the US where you get sued if you didn't have one of these and some kid got their finger cut off wouldn't buy one? They're about twice as expensive, or at least they were, as a regular saw. And the little charge thing is about, I think it was about $200. So every time some kid figures, I wonder if that actually works, they sold another $200 worth of stuff. It's brilliant. But they saw a real need in the market, and they filled it. And now these saws are, the standard. They hold the patent on that. They're the only ones who can sell that. Brilliant. So that's a great idea. But how do you actually do this? So if you think about what are the big steps about how do you bring a new product to market, so you get the idea. That's relatively easy. I know it's not, but that's just the first step. Then you actually have to prove that it works. And not just prove that it works in a nice controlled environment like a lab where you can control all the parameters and get rid of all the other noise that's out there. But does it work in practice? When you release it into the wild, can you still use it? And does it work, at least reliably enough that, people will adopt your solution? And then you have to scale up and manufacture this. That is no trivial task, because it's relatively easy to make one. It might even be relatively easy to make 10. But you have to now, let's say, make 1 million. And that means you need a factory. That means you need somewhere to warehouse them. You need somewhere to store them and ship them and distribute them. There's a whole lot of work going into that. And just that issue of scaling. When you make the first one, you can have your parameters really tightly controlled. So your tolerances are really tight. But by the time you use a mold, let's say, to make something, 10,000 times, that mold might get a little loose. And so your tolerances might not be that tight, and that can be a really challenging piece. Doesn't really matter what industry you're in, there is some regulatory approval that you need. It might be CSA, it might be underwriters, It might be the FDA or Health Canada or the Environmental Protection Group. There's something. Somebody is going to say, hold on, is that safe? Can you sell it? They're going to want to make sure that it's approved. And then you actually have to get it out into the hands of people. And so you know, depending on what type of product it is, who are you selling to? Are you selling to the general public? How are you going to get it on a store shelf? Who's going to distribute it? Who's going to warehouse it? Like all that sort of stuff. So it's, you have to think, you know, that all that stuff is a lot of work. All those last 4 steps, you know, make the cost of coming up with the idea relatively cheap. So there's a lot of value in those last stages, and from an industry perspective, relatively little value in the idea, because it's the execution of the idea that matters the most. And that's where most of the costs of developing new product are. It's not to say the research isn't valuable, but it's often worth less than people think it should be. And so you can do all that, but you don't want to spend all that money getting to the end only to find out your product didn't cut it, nobody bought it. So what are some of the things that you gotta be thinking about beforehand? These are a list. I've got two slides of these, the sort of things that people don't always think about. And one of the most important ones is the market. Who is going to buy it? Is such a key question. And, you know, relates to the other one. You know, people think we've got this great solution. We're the only ones. There's always another solution, even if the other solution is doing absolutely nothing, because the cost of doing nothing is 0. And the cost of doing whatever your solution is has a real cost. So does it fit? Like, is the pain of the problem big enough to pay for your solution? Is one way to look at that. People often think because they've got a patent, they've got some sort of market exclusivity. Not likely. We're doing an audit right now on a technology that came out of the University of Manitoba, and because patents are filed in individual countries, we found out that as part of the audit, the company that we licensed this technology to, and it was licensed about 15 years ago, a long time ago before I joined them, they didn't file patents in every country. They only filed in the US, Germany, Canada, Japan, and Australia, let's say. But the company is making the product in Ireland, because that means they don't have to pay royalties on stuff made where there's no patent. So, there's ways around that. Freedom to operate is another big question. One of the ways to look at this is, so you've got your little piece of technology that's valuable, but you can't use your piece without the other piece. Yours is part of something bigger. And if somebody holds some patent around that, they may actually block your path to the market, and so you don't have that freedom to operate. Another really big problem that I've seen is this: we don't have absolutely clear, this is what this product does. It can do all kinds of things. We can use it in all different kinds of markets. It's really, really, really hard to get money to move a product like that forward. You have to pick a market first, the first one. Once you have the first one, you can say, okay, now we're going to go there, and then we're going to go there with the second and third. But you have to have a crystal clear value proposition for the end users and for the people who are going to help pay for the development of this. Regulatory hurdles, everybody goes, well, of course it'll just smoothly move through the regulatory system. Not likely. I've seen lots of technologies that have been hung up by that. It's really important to have experienced management. As brilliant as researchers are, they're often not very good business people. Just like business people who are very experienced aren't very good researchers. So you need the right people at the right time in the company, and you need the right a broad set of skill sets as you grow a company. We already talked about the value of technology. People often overvalue them. The scale-up is often really hard. I think I took the example of it. I'll maybe talk to it for just a moment. I was involved in this technology a number of years ago. It's a small molecule that was isolated from a sea sponge in the South Pacific. And it was a natural source, but that was limited, so we had to come up with a synthetic source. And we made a couple of milligrams for about $500,000. You know, but we needed kilos of material. And so that just proved to be an impossible task to generate enough material and to scale that up. It's really important that you understand your assumptions and that you challenge your assumptions often as you're thinking about a new product. And then this is one of my favorites, is people get feedback from their friends, their families, you know, their mothers, as of course it's a great idea, how could it, you know, how could you not come up with a good idea? And they don't get that honest feedback that people need. And it's really important to get that feedback. This is another great example that I think fits maybe with your group a little bit. Did this work a number of years ago when I was a consultant. I won't say the university that this came out of, but I was not here. There was a researcher who had spent a lot of time, probably a couple of $1 million in basic research funding, to develop this device to detect whether a dental implant was ready to load or not. So I don't know what you know about dental implants, but it's basically a two-stage procedure. First stage is they drill a hole in your bone, they put a pin in there, they let the bone heal around that, and then they put a crown on top of that, which is the tooth. So there's a gap between the time you put the post in and the time you put the crown on, because that bone has to grow around that post. So he was used to dealing with the most extreme of the extreme cases, but he developed this device, and it was really quite slick. I knew nothing about dental implants at that point in my career. But what he did was he basically pinged it, and he looked at the waveform that came off of that, and by looking at that over a time course, could tell you whether that bone had grown around that post and it was solid or not. My job as a consultant was to do the market assessment. So I went out and talked to 20 orthodontist type folks who do that work. Most unanimous response ever in all the market research I ever did. No, absolutely not, no way, period. Because it wasn't a real problem for them. What they found was about 95% of those posts were nice and solid at about week 4. So they told everybody to come back at week 6. And the 1 or 2% that weren't ready at week 6, they simply sent home and said, come back in about a month. And then they were solid. Except for maybe like 0.001% of them. So there was not any real need for the technology. And this guy had developed this, it was slick. He had like looked like a pen, he had a designer design it so it looked really slick, it looked beautiful. But nobody wanted it because they all said, no, now we need an extra chair for people to come in. Those people have to come in every week so we can do the time course. Absolutely not, we'll just wait. It's not a rush. We don't care. And so, this guy had spent all that work doing that, but he hadn't looked at how would this thing actually be used. So take that as a sort of case study on how not to do things. It's really hard work, if you haven't got that already, to identify good technologies. Tons of ideas, but you've got to sort of look carefully to find the ones that are really, really valuable. So what makes them valuable? So they've got to be better. Better how? Well, they have to be technically better. So faster, cheaper, they have to add some new function that didn't exist previously. You have to be able to protect them. Nobody's going to take on a couple of $1 million, or in the case of something like a pharmaceutical, hundreds of millions of dollars in development costs, if they don't have some assurance that they can have some chunk of the market without their competitors coming in and doing it for a fraction of that cost. So that's where patents and trademarks and all that stuff come in. And we'll talk more about those a little later. It's also got to have the feasible development. So the time to develop something has to fit with the market, because you're all in research, your fields are moving forward fairly rapidly. So if it's going to take you 10 years to develop your product, where's the research going to be in 10 years? Like, is this still going to be at the cutting edge? It may not be. It's got to have a reasonable expectation of profit. Because if you're in business to make money. And if you can't make money at it, why should you do it? There are a few products that not-for-profits can make a go of, but it's really hard. So again, you have to find a way to either build it cheaply enough to solve the problem, or find a way to be able to charge more for it. And it's got to be compatible with the people. Sometimes you find, you've got a brilliant idea, you've got the right inventors, you've got this really good idea, but the inventors, want to do it themselves. They don't play well with others, and that can sink a company. So you have to have that whole piece, and because it really does require that village to raise that technology. So it's important. This is an important slide. If you don't remember anything else, remember this. So you thought, as you develop technologies, you've got all these things that sort of are important. Together they make a bundle of benefits, but really the only thing that matters at the end of the day is there value for the customer. So again, think about your phone. Do you care what technologies are in here? Do you care which chip is in here? Or which patents got issued by whom? Or, all that stuff? No, you care that when you send a message to your friends, they respond. And it works. And the battery lasts. You care about what it does for you, not really what's inside. There may be a few things you care about, certain features you might want to screen that has a certain resolution, but even that, you're looking at, is there value? Is the picture clear enough? Can I do what I want it to do? Is it fast enough? So that's important. So how do we move things out of the university? There's a couple of ways we do that. We can license the technology. So we basically then say to somebody, here's a technology that we have. We will let you move it forward, and you will pay us something for it as you sell something. Effectively, that's what a license looks like. And, software licenses are kind of like that. Software, you license it from somebody, and you pay them for that privilege. And some of the more recent models are you pay as you go. So that's just the other way around that. We could sell it to them outright. We could say, here it is, give us a lump sum for it, and then it's yours, you do whatever you want with it. Often doesn't work well with the university model, but we can do it that way. We can partner, we can share technology. This often happens when companies co-develop something. So two companies might have something that they need each other's. So they might decide that they're going to partner, they might create a new company to deal with that thing. That's often more a corporate piece. And then we can create a NewCo. We can create a startup company to develop a new idea forward. This works really well if the technology is standalone enough that it doesn't need a lot of other pieces, and the products that come out of that technology are high enough value. So that can happen, but we really need the right people around that. We need people who will, be the CEO, who will lead that commercial charge, not continue to research the products. Because one of the challenges, that I've seen is if in many cases, not in every, but in many cases, if the inventor becomes the CEO, too often the product gets mired in, you know what, I should do a little bit more research, it's almost perfect, it's almost perfect, it's almost perfect, and it never actually gets to the market. And I saw one technology that took about 10 years for that to happen, and then they brought in an external guy to be the CEO, and then within a year, it got to the market because it had focus. And they said, you know what, that's good enough for version 1. So let me jump a little bit here and start talking about intellectual property. Because again, so we talked about sort of what criteria a new product has to have in order to be interesting to the market. And intellectual property and the ability to protect it is one of those pieces. So there's effectively 4 types of intellectual property. Now this is, I've only got an hour, so you're going to get the Coles Notes version of intellectual property. But there's copyrights. When you create something, and I'll go into each of these, when you create something, you create a copyright. If you write something or take a photograph, you create copyright. Trademarks, you've all seen the trademarks and the logos, Coke, for example, we'll talk about those. Trade secrets, and then patents are the main types. So copyrights, you know, it's works. And the university gives you copyright. You own the copyright when you write something down. When you write your thesis down, you own the copyright to your thesis. When you generate a paper, you own the copyright to that paper. Now you may license that or assign that to somebody else so that it can get published, but that belongs to you, and the university, for the most part, doesn't have any claim to that. It's created as soon as you create it. There's nothing magical about it. They belong to you. You don't have to register copyright. You can. In certain instances, it makes sense. And the rights generally last for the life of the author plus 50 years. The value of copyright, every once in a while you hear, you know, some musician ripped off a song or ripped off a melody from somebody else, and they, you know, got sued for, you know, $1 million or something like that. Relatively minor type wins in terms of copyright because it's easy to get around copyright. So if you modify it in some way, you can generally get around that copyright, and then you've created something of your own. So copyright is a form of protection, but it is somewhat limited. Trademarks are those names and symbols that we use. You have to file for these. They're not very expensive. They're issued in each individual country, so you have to file them in the countries that you're going to use them. And there is a use them or lose them mentality around trademarks. So if you have something, you think you've got a trademark, and you say, wow, you know, I need to protect this around the world, and you go and you file in all these countries, but then you only sell it in one country, you're going to lose the trademarks in those other countries because if you don't use them, the offices will take them away from you. But the good news is, if you are using them, Coke is a great example. You know, that shape of that bottle, it lasts for pretty much forever. Nobody else can use that particular shape. Trade secrets are another one. They don't fit well with what happens here at the university. At the university, our mandate is information sharing. So we don't keep secrets very well. So we as a university don't use trade secrets really at all. Because you have to be able to keep it a secret. And you maintain that through contracts. So we will sign confidentiality agreements with companies where they have some confidential information that they want to keep a secret. And I'm one of the folks who can sign it on behalf of the university. If a company ever asks you to sign a confidentiality agreement on behalf of the university, don't. You can't. It's not binding. There's only a few of us who actually have that authority to bind the university to that confidentiality. So you can maintain that but it's really difficult. And we always try to narrow the confidentiality agreements to as narrow as absolutely possible. Because we don't want to know too much, because we don't know what we might say. And that me, as a signer of those, I don't know what you're going to say. And we'll often get the researchers, the PIs of the lab, to sign that they've read and understood, and it's their responsibility to keep that information secret. Now, we had an instance a couple of years ago where a student, graduate student, was working on a product, or on a project with an industry partner, and they decided that it was a really good idea to photograph this product that industry had in development, that they considered very secret, and post it on their Facebook page. Now, that was a really stupid thing to do, because the company really valued that secret. They did not want people to know what they were working. Thankfully, it was recognized and it was taken down within an hour, but that researcher nearly lost that funding, and that funding was quite substantial as a result of that. So we take that seriously, and that student was reprimanded. Everybody was very nervous that the company was going to sue us. That would be bad, and even worse, that they would pull their funding. So we don't want that, so we take that confidentiality seriously. We don't sign it unless we need to. The good news about trade secrets is, they don't expire. They're good for a long time. You don't need any government approvals. You just keep it a secret. There's a story about KFC and their secret mix of spices that they actually have 4 different factories that make that spice. One factory takes 3 spices and mixes it, and nobody knows what the exact ratio is except for the one person who knows what ratio to dump them in at. Another factory takes another 3 or 4 spices, as does the third one, and then they ship all of those to a 4th factory where they don't know what the first factory's created, and then they mix those 3 mixtures in another mixture in some secret formula. So, is it true? I don't know. When people go to great lengths to protect trade secrets, because if they're really valuable, then you want to keep it a secret. Now, I would argue today, with the science that's out there, it'd be pretty easy to reverse engineer the secret spice mixture of KFC. A bit of time and a mass spec, most people could probably figure it out. But there's a number of companies that claim to have those sort of trade secrets. Trade secrets really don't work, though. If you can look at something, take it apart, figure out what it is, and make your own, because then it's no longer a secret. So if something can be reverse engineered, it's not really a good thing to keep a secret. So that doesn't work for those sorts of things. And to maintain that kind of secrecy requires an awful lot of work. You have to be very careful who you hire. You have to have proper security of your facility, all that sort of thing. It can be really complicated. So patents. And this is the thing that my office spends the most amount of time with. And so this applies to inventions that are these 3 criteria: new, non-obvious, and useful. Those are the 3 criteria that the Patent Office. And I'll speak about each of those specifically. So patents are country specific. So you have to file a patent in each country that you want to obtain protection in. I'll go into some of the costs a little bit later about why that's a difficult thing to do, because this gets really expensive in a hurry. And you have to file before you talk about it. This is incredibly important, because if you talk about it and if somebody can find it somewhere, and the internet is a wonderful thing, you don't have that right. The rights belong to the inventor on creation, but they are assignable. And when we get an invention disclosure, we ask you to sign an assignment document so that we can manage it on your behalf. Patent rights generally last for 20 years from the application date. There's some country-specific things in there, but that's a nice general rule. So the new, non-obvious, and useful. Well, new is pretty easy. If you put it into Google, what exactly it is that you think you found, or any other search engine, or go through the literature, you can't find anybody who's done exactly what you've done before. Pretty straightforward. Utility or usefulness, that's pretty easy to figure out too. Does it do something useful? Because, let's face it, if you're going to spend money on these things, it should be doing something that's useful. Because this is not a paper. There's value in it, but it's not just another research paper. Non-obviousness is the much more difficult criteria to get your head around. So, non-obvious to who? So it can't be just a minor tweak. It can't be just adding another component to something. It can't be, changing the size of one component or the other. It's got to be something that's effectively not predictable. So there has to be a bit of an aha. I didn't expect that kind of thing that happens there for it to be, really strong on the non-obviousness piece. Now, a good patent agent will be able to work with some things that are sort of on the edge of that and get you some protection, but the strongest protection is when it's really that aha moment. And those are the things that have, obviously, the most value. So why patent? So patents give you the legal right to stop somebody else from making, using, or selling your invention in those countries that you've got patent protection in. It really does create a lot of opportunity to capture value. So you can use a patent to basically, charge people to use your invention. So it can do that. It can sort of control or affect the commercialization by doing that, by stopping people. You give the right to some people to commercialize it, but not others, so then you can sort of change the way it works. The downside to patents, the trade-off, is that it really becomes public within 18 months. All patent applications are published about 18 months after they're filed, so then the world knows how to do your invention. So again, think about if you are protecting it in a variety of countries, you probably can't afford to protect in all of them. So you choose the ones that matter to you the most. But you still have this thing where it's public in all those other countries because they've got the internet too. And after 20 years, it's just in the public domain and there's no patent protection that's left. I'll talk about the cost, but it's very expensive to get patents. It depends exactly for what, but patents are expensive. And then the onus is on you, the patent holder or the license holder or whoever it may be, to stop somebody else from using it, just because you have the patent. If you don't go out and stop or challenge the people who are selling something that might be infringing on your patent, if you don't stop them, they'll just continue happily along their way. So you might have to actually go out and stop them or challenge them. Now, in the US, where patents tend to have the most value, there's this concept called treble damages, so that if somebody is willingly infringing on your patent, and you don't catch them right away, but they know that you've got a patent, they're sort of trying to just hope they don't get busted. They will, they can pay 3 times what they earned from your patent if you win your lawsuit. Now, patent lawsuits are a big deal. I mean, you've probably seen in the news, Apple and Samsung sue each other all the time for this sort of stuff. But yet, they have each other's chips in their phones at the same time. There's a lot of value there if they try to sort of capture a bigger market share. So this, yes, and I've got a couple of other things down here, design patents and plant patents. Don't worry too much about those. But you've got a sort of a bit of a summary. A trade secret can last 5 minutes until somebody else knows, or it can last forever if you can keep a secret. But it doesn't cost anything at the front end or even along the way, but it can cost you everything if your business is reliant on that and then it's suddenly gone. Copyright is maybe $1,000 if you choose to file. There's not much value there. Trademarks can last a long time. They're not very expensive, depends on how many countries you file in. And then patents are, where you've got some real protection, but the cost of entry is a lot higher for patents. So what makes a good patent? Questions to ask are, can somebody design around this really easily? Like if your patent is quite narrow and it has these very specific claims, can people work around it? Can they come up with an alternative solution that gets to the same end result? Because the patent doesn't protect the process. It protects the exact thing that you've got developed. So if you can design around it, it may not make a good patent. Can the patent be challenged? Well, if it's making a lot of money, somebody will sue you. So you have to make sure you've got a very solid patent and a series of claims. It's kind of like building a moat around your technology. Another question that sometimes people ask is, okay, so I think there's a market for this. Does it make sense? The rule of thumb that we use is the market has to be at least $10 million in annual sales before it makes sense to file a patent. Because otherwise you're just going to spend a lot of money on patents and not actually make enough on them. Patents are expensive. You've got the question of freedom to operate. What else do you need in order to enable your invention? Do you need to license somebody else's patents? Will they license them to you? What will they charge you for them? Things change in the patent world. Things that were allowed are no longer allowed. Genes are a great example of that. It used to be you could patent a gene sequence. Not so much today. And there's other areas, and it changes. So this is a moving target. And again, in different countries, the rules are different. And actually, I have that one there twice. And then, so you have to look at the whole life of the patent from, will it allow you to generate enough revenue to pay for all that time and effort you're going to put in? So what makes a good patent? So something that's easy to reverse engineer. That makes a decent patent because that gives you the ability to stop somebody else from doing that. It's got to have a good business advantage. You need to secure that competitive advantage because you want to keep other people out of the market. Within Canada and the US, there is a 1-year grace period after you disclose something publicly. Don't use that because it's only in Canada and the US. The rest of the world, it then becomes public domain. So if your invention, it may be sold in Canada and the US, but if you want to sell it in Europe or Japan or some of the other major markets, you may not have patent protection there. Now, generally, again, rule of thumb is that a US patent is worth probably about 90% of all the patent value. If you patent it in every country in the world, a US patent will hold 90% of that value. Europe would hold probably 7 or 8%. Japan would hold probably 2%, and the rest of the world combined is maybe 1% of the patent value. So that's, the US for now, that's changing. China and India are definitely coming up in terms of importance of patents. But it matters, and it really matters to think about where your market is for your product. If you've got a product, we've got one right now that's involving canola as a source of fiber, and we're just deciding which countries we should file in. So our strategy is, where are people growing large amounts of canola? Because this process is going to require people to deal with it pretty much at the source, because you can't ship the raw fiber too far before the costs get out of hand. So countries decided on, basically you look at who grows canola in any kind of quantity, and that's pretty much the order that we're choosing in which to file patents, because that's where the market's going to be. And even though the US is not necessarily one of those big countries, it's I think number 5 or 6 down the list, because the US is such an important commerce center, we're also filing in the US. Now, it's pretty easy to kill a patentable idea. This public disclosure thing is fatal. And again, I said, the US and Canada is a year. Japan, you get this weird rule around 6 months. If it was at a conference, again, don't use those. But if you talk about it and that idea is out there, in the wild as it were, it makes it ineligible to get patent protection on. So what is public disclosure? And it can be any one of these things. The key is, have you given people enough information to enable them to basically to replicate your idea? So there's a lot of ways that you can talk about things at a conference without disclosing your secret sauce. But I would say, you want to ask somebody like the TTO before you do that. And we're pretty responsive, so, but things like submitting a paper to a journal for review, generally considered confidential. However, more and more journals are doing e-publications in advance of the print publications. So you have to be really aware, because as soon as it's out there on the web, that's definitely public disclosure. So, same thing with a grant proposal, Often when you give a slide presentation or a talk at a conference, you're not giving away the secret sauce. You're giving away what the end result is, but not necessarily enough details to recreate how you got there. So just be aware of public disclosure if you think you might have something that's potentially of value. Come talk to us at the Tech Transfer office. We're happy to help. So this slide is maybe a bit harsh, but it's not about the technology. It's about the business opportunity that the technology creates. That's why you patent something. So just in terms of costs, there's a long process for patent applications. We generally file what's called a provisional before we file a formal patent application. That's somewhere sort of between $5,000 and $10,000. We do that very quickly, and that buys a year to basically fill out the rest of the patent information. Then we file what's called a PCT application. That's the formal patent application. That starts at 18-month clock for publication. That gets to be, it's about another, I would say $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how big and how complex the patent is. Then you've got that. Then 18 months after that is when things really get expensive, because you have to go to the national phase, and then you have to pick your countries. And it's generally, between $5,000 and $10,000 a country. So if you're starting to think about, let's go into 20 countries, and I think I heard this the other day, there's more than 200 countries around the world. So if you think you're going to take, assume $5,000 per country, and you got 200 countries, you're talking $1 million. Does it make sense? Better have something that's really, really lucrative commercially before you're going to spend that kind of money. Because that only gets to the application. Then you actually have to prosecute it, and every patent office is going to come back with questions and challenge you. And the default response from the patent office is no. We think it's obvious, or we don't think that's patentable. And so then you have to go back and forth, and that costs time and money and lawyer fees and all that other good stuff. And then, assuming that you get it issued, they're governments, they like revenue sources. They charge you an issuance fee, and then they charge you a maintenance fee every couple of years just to keep it in force. So it's going to cost you a lot of money to maintain patents. So again, you have to have commercial value. Just put patents into the context of where this is. So you're here at this early stage. You file patents way back over here, maybe even in the research stage. Patents generally don't issue until you've spent an awful lot of money in your product development. And so if you're a company and you're thinking about your business strategy, you don't wait to start until you've got an issued patent. You start while you're filing patents, and you file more and more and more because you really want to build that fence. And so the costs I gave you were for one patent application. Most technology-based companies try to build a patent portfolio. We've got a company that spun out of the University of Manitoba about 2 years ago called Exogens. I think they started with a single patent. We've now filed 2 more as a university, and they, as a company, have filed about 4 or 5 more. And they've allocated, the next couple of years, about $1 million for patent filings. It's big money. I want to spend a bit of time talking, and I say I'm already at 5.
We started a bit late. 5 more minutes?
Do I have 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'll try not to keep you too long. I want to talk a little bit about partnering with industry. Partnering with industry is really important. As I talked about at the beginning, we really want to encourage this as a university. We do see this as win-win opportunities. So, again, we can license things. We can do fee-for-service type work for companies. We don't like to do this because we don't want to compete with the private sector, but we can do a little bit of that. But what we really want to do is collaborative research, where companies and researchers can do collaborative things together, because we think that that's really good. We've got a process for how to make that easy. But what's important here is why do it? We want companies to become more innovative, to bring new products and new solutions to the market. We want them to be competitive and profitable because then they're paying more taxes. So that helps sort of the whole economy. We think it's good for companies because it brings them future staff as well. So if you as students are working on industry projects, it's like a long job interview for something. You get to know them, they get to know you. If you're doing good work, they like you. There's a natural give and take there. And we also see the impact of University of Manitoba technologies sort of being used around the world. That's a good story for the University of Manitoba if we can create that. For us, it increases our research base. This is good. There's more dollars to do research. We can spread the administration costs over a greater base. There's opportunities for our students, which we think is good because most of you, frankly, are not going to end up as academics. I think the most recent stat I heard was about 20% of PhD students end up becoming academics. So where are the other 80% going to go? Probably a good chunk of those are going to go into industry. So, we want to prepare you for the future. And we also think, it's good for us to be part of our community. I want to go through this very quickly, just to show you some of the complexities of why, this isn't really easy. So you've got a university researcher and a company. They agree that they want to do something. Great. But then you've got all these other groups around there, right? We've got students and postdocs who all have different criteria. Faculty have departmental responsibilities. We've got some constraints legally and what we can and can't do. People have teaching responsibilities. They've got research grants. Companies on the other end have their customers. They've got something that they're already trying to do. They have shareholders that they might not want to spend too much on research. They've got constraints. The type of projects are often different. Researchers are often interested in understanding how something works, the why of it. Companies are interested in what can it do for me today. So they're looking for an advantage. Researchers are often looking for long-term projects. Companies are looking for short-term projects. The different rationales for doing projects together. And so getting that alignment is really hard. Researchers like to work with everybody. We like to be collaborative here at the university. Collaborations are good, and they are. With a company, they don't want to collaborate with their competitors. That's obviously bad. And universities often work at very small scales, very nice controlled environments. Companies work, in these messy markets.